Hello, everybody. Thank you for tuning into the Liberty Report. This is Friday, and this is the day we do Mythbusters, and our co-host is Chris Rosini. Chris, what do we have today for our program?
Good morning, Dr. Paul. Well, this week, a Washington Post editorial caught our eye, and the headline especially, it said, sobering news for $15 minimum wage boosters. And it turns out that the sobering news is that the raise in the minimum wage is actually hurting the people that it was intended to help. So who knew? So today we're going to talk about why that is. Why does the government raising minimum wage help the less fortunate amongst us?
Well, I think
the first
Go ahead.
Okay. I was going to say the first topic is that many people think that government could use force in one area and everything will stay as is. But employers respond. So if you could talk about how employers respond.
Well, it's pretty predictable, and it's amazing that the Washington Post woke up and had a revelation all of a sudden, because it must be really bad and really very obvious for them to come to the conclusion that they could have come to, maybe 50, 60, 70 years ago. It's been known for a long time that when you raise a minimum wage, you put a burden on the businessman, and he will adjust. So this is what they're doing now, and you see it in the reports. The businessman does respond. I mean, we've seen Seattle in the news. They went to $15 an hour rather rapidly, and lo and behold, a lot of people were laid off. So that's the first thing. The other thing that happens, business people respond. They're in the business of making money, and they're not in the business of taking care of the world. Their job is to make it they're a successful company. So what they can do, if this puts them over the margin, they're not going to make any money or cut into their profits and they can't expand, this sort of thing, what they have to do is either they fire people, but they might not fire everybody. They might just cut down the hours. I've heard the complaints already that people said, well, I used to be able to get 50 hours in a week, but now I'm only going to get 38, and I'm going to have to get another job in order to make up for what I lost, and it canceled out what they gained, from the minimum wage being increased. And also, it's been in the news, and this might be what's waking up some of the liberals who are reporting on this now. Maybe the robots are the ones that realizing that there's a substitute, and there's so much activity, and technology does substitute for hard labor, and a lot of it can be very normal and natural, even in a free market, because certainly a lot of people in the farming industry were put out of work when the tractor came in. But that was all beneficial, and there's a transition. They go from one industry to another. But when we come up with the situation we have today, because in truth, the low wage earner is in trouble, but is he in trouble because there's a free market? No, he's in trouble because the government has been involved. The government, even though they're in total denial that there's no inflation, there's tremendous inflation for the average person. And that individual has a tough time. And also you see what's happening to the very, very wealthy. How are they doing so well? And if you look into that, it's not because of free markets. They're there because they have these special privileges from government. They're in the military-industrial complex. They're in the manipulation of the stock market, and they do quite well. So what they're trying to do, and the businessman is trying to adjust, is to an artificial interference once again. And this is why this whole debate is off target, because the debate should be, why is there this inequity? To deny that there's an inequity and, poor people have to get a better job and get training, there's some of that is true, but really, the problem is we have a Federal Reserve System, we have a government system, a tax system, a regulatory system that causes these problems, and then there's an inequity, and it's easy to elicit a little bit of sympathy for the people who are suffering the most, and right now that group is getting larger in spite of all the fancy prognostications and the good reports and stock market doing well. There's still 100 million people out there, a million people out there that's under underemployed. And even with so-called good statistic, there's a lot of people suffering. But businessmen will adjust. They have to. Their purpose is to stay in business. And one thing that's difficult for a lot of people to realize is that the government shouldn't be in the business of making sure business people make a lot of profits, which they are very interested in doing, because contracts with government, especially in the military, cost overruns they get paid for. And labor union pressure in those same businesses, they get their wages above average. And then somebody else, the poor person, comes up short. But to put another interference and another manipulation and another control won't solve the problem. And the one thing that one has to remember, if you can control a minimum wage and make a law, you can't hire anybody, that will create a black market, of course. But if you do that, they also have the authority to control the wages from going too high when the condition is that wages are rising too quickly. And I remember very clearly what it was like in the early 1970s, where wages were frozen and all prices were frozen. So it's the principle also of government interference, and we concede this, saying, this whole idea, raise the minimum wage and things are going to get better. So what you have reported, Chris, with this article is very good news, that maybe they're waking up to a little bit of common sense.
Well, let's hope so. Next, let's cover a very fascinating thing that happens, and it's a cognitive dissonance. Because a lot of the people, the same people that advocate a raise in the minimum wage, clearly understand that if they call for government to raise prices on cigarettes or soda, they realize that people will buy less of it and find alternatives. However, if government artificially raises the wage, a cognitive dissonance sets in that they can't accept that employers will actually buy less because of the higher price. Why does this happen, Dr. Paul?
Well, there's two reasons. One, they can be totally ignorant of, how economics works, and they may well be interested in demagoguing the issue, and playing on this and politicizing it so they can step in to be the humanitarian. I like to think freedom is the most humane system ever, and the best system to create the maximum amount of wealth and the best distribution. But they don't accept this, so it doesn't take them very long to get very confused because they don't come from a basic set of principles, and then they come along and they're willing to demagogue for political reasons, and they'll come up with all these constructions on what is going wrong. But if they would look at it, if they realize that what you're pointing out is a simple common sense approach. Well, if you do ABC over here and it causes a problem, but it won't cause a problem if you do this over here, which is raising wages, it's interfering. So we're dealing with a society that really is coming to an end. The interventionist economic system, the welfare system, the Federal Reserve system, fiat money, that's all coming to an end. So it's really an opportunity for us to try to point these things out on what's going on, rather than saying, well, we have to do more. They did it in Venezuela and it works so well down there. What we need is more government rules and regulation and owner to make sure everybody's treated fairly. And that's why, when you have presidential candidates coming out, say we have to do this, we have to have a high minimum wage, and we have to interfere more, and government has to give free medical care and free education. They're very confused and very political, but eventually they should look back and say, this has been tested before. Maybe we ought to look at the facts. And too often, major professors who are, their whole life system of economic policy is at stake, because if we're right and they're wrong, they have to reject their whole system. And I keep thinking back to when I would challenge Bernanke and some of the others. Bernanke in particular wrote a lot about the Depression, but he psychologically, it would be impossible for him to be converted, because he would say to himself, I spent 50 years, learning this stuff and writing about it. It can't be wrong. So they have to go along with these mistakes, but hopefully we can, at times, edge our way in and produce some different ideas. And that's what I'm hoping, that this news that came out as somewhat objective in the Washington Post is a sign that there's an opening for us.
Yes. The next thing we want to point out here, Dr. Paul, is that an employment contract is two-sided. You get paid for bringing value to your employer. And the more value you bring, the more you're going to be paid, or a competitor will come and pay you more. But the minimum wage only seeks to increase the pay, but it does nothing about the value. Are we supposed to sit and think that employers are a special breed of person, that they're just going to pay more for no more value?
Yeah, and they won't. But their answer, the answer of the opposition, if we don't undermine their philosophy rather soon, their answer is, well, we need more government regulations to take care of this. And that, of course, just expands the role of government. And I think that's, obviously the wrong thing to do. But you have to create more value. And why it's so difficult is the transition. Can you imagine the demagoguing that would go on when the tractors are coming in and we're going to put 100,000 farm workers, field workers out of work? People, oh, why? What are they going to do? How are they going to make a living? Well, maybe they'll go to the factories and work in air conditioning and make tractors. But that might take a while. But the more the government's involved of saying, do this, this, and this, or making problems worse by taxes and regulation, the more difficult the transition is. And I think we're in an age of transition, and but it's very bumpy, and it's not always the fairest thing to do. It's fair according to what the bureaucrats and the interventionists believe, and there's always imperfections, so that means that the bureaucrat and the liberal wants to come and say, we're the only ones who care about fairness. We understand this, and it may be true that there's a transition period, but we want to make sure that nobody's without anything. And, of course, that's their motive in education and medical care. And look at the disaster. Prices go up, costs go up, there's more inflation, the quality goes down, so it doesn't work. But production and is the most important thing. And this is the reason people have to understand that the whole system isn't designed to make a wage at a precise level and be dictated to, maximum or minimum, or a businessman can be guaranteed a profit. And the market works. And this is, I know, difficult for some people to believe unless they understand the benefits of the market. The market deals with the consumer. And people would say, well, we have to keep those cheap products from China because we want people here in this country to make this stuff. Well, if we had a free market, we probably could make some. But if you can get tennis shoes for $10 instead of $100, and you say you got to pay $100 to protect jobs here, what have you done to the poor people? It's once again, you mess around with the minimum wage law, and then you mess around by saying that we have to take care of people and have more equity. It just doesn't work. Almost always it backfires. And one thing it reminds me of is that when a bill came to the floor and you want to study it, and if you get hold of the bill, you look at the title. If you voted on the title, I'd probably vote for everything. It's always exactly opposite of what it would do. So if they come in and say, this is the bill to eliminate poverty in the country forever, well, rest assured, it's going to make poverty a lot worse. The headline, the name of the bill is essentially always wrong. Whether it's in foreign policy, we're going to be peace and prosperity forever. We're going to make the world safe for democracy, and we're going to get rid of that back dictator, and we're going to introduce democracy to that country. All those bills do exactly the opposite, and hopefully someday they'll wake up like individuals are waking up now and recognizing the minimum wage is a fraud, waking up and looking at the whole philosophy of intervention and say, It's a fraud. It doesn't work. And therefore, we ought to consider something else. And that's why I think the message of liberty has a real chance at this. And people will give us a look because this system is coming apart. And that's why there's chaos in Washington. That's why they can't come up with a government program on medical care because there isn't a good one. And the whole goal, as far as I'm concerned, and the Institute of Peace and Prosperity, is to produce the reasons why liberty is an answer, and it isn't a destroyer of wealth, it's a creation of wealth, and it causes the growth of the largest middle class. That is when the middle class gets the largest, and what do we see now? We see it being liquidated because of this inability to understand actually how it works.
Finally, Dr. Paul, America started out as a land of liberty, but power always desires to crush liberty, and we've drifted very far to the point where even recognizing that in a free society there would be no minimum wage, I mean, that would startle people. So if you could explain why that's such a far superior idea than government interfering in employment contracts, and how would labor and the payment of labor work in a truly free society?
Well, I think the best word to describe how it would work, everything would be voluntary. Two people come together for a voluntary exchange. And that should be understood that that's both socially on what our personal habits and lives are and our religious beliefs, but in economics, two people should come together and they should exchange their value. The most the government, the Constitution authorized was to have honest money, so the facilitator, the money issue, would be something that would be sound and not something that is changed every day, the value of the dollar. So it would work on a voluntary system, and that, of course, would reject the notion of government force. Oh, what do you mean? You can't give up on government force. How would we have law and order? How would we have peace in our cities? How would we get rid of the criminals? How would we get rid of all the people who drink too much if we didn't have government force? Yeah, and look how well it's worked out. I mean, it's a mess. The government used the force to mold society. Look how well it worked out with prohibition of alcohol. But did we learn a lesson? No, we make prohibition of marijuana, and it does the same thing, and then people get surprised. People are waking up to this, but now we're back and forth. Oh, well, we can't afford that much rejection of government force. Government knows best, and you have two groups that love to use government to run the world and run us. And that's the conservatives and the liberals. So the liberals are more inclined to want to dictate how we spend our money, and conservatives want to dictate about what our personal habits would be and whether we smoke or drink and this sort of thing. But the rejection should be that of the rejection of use of force. We know, and most people still accept this principle, that you and I can't use force to get what we want. We can't go to our neighbor. We don't have a car and we can't get to work, and they have 3 cars. I have a right to that automobile. No, they don't accept that. But they do accept the idea that if they're having trouble paying some of their bills in a tough go, they have a right to send their congressman to my neighbor and with a gun take from him and give me the stuff that I think I have a right to. And so we reject the notion that individuals can use force to get what they want because it's robbing people, but morally, it's acceptable now in this age that it's okay for government. Government's different. But that is in contrast to nobody likes the government anymore. About 78% of the people don't even trust the government on foreign policy. This is why I say the door is opening for what we see on the enlightenment of some people on the minimum wage. If they could only be enlightened with this principle of the use of force, boy, I'll tell you what, I think we'd improve rather quickly. And that's the magnificent thing about liberty is, if tomorrow, I'm convinced of this, if tomorrow the market crashed, we had no money, we were broke as a country, the pension funds are no good, which they might come to in a not too distant future, and we have to turn tail and come home, I would say if you deliver liberty to the people, true liberty, property ownership, contracts, sound money, and just get out of the way, I think the country would be so wealthy in a year plus a little. It would work so quickly, but you'd have to have that principle implanted. And the government, our country's not ready for that right now, although the seeds are out there and it's describable. We can describe what it would be like. We have to use this as an opportunity because indeed, if those do-gooders and the humanitarians who are arguing for this best society to take care of poor people, I tell you what, if you really care about poor people and you care about what's going on, and you care about liberty, you would certainly look at the whole concept of what true liberty is all about. And we're talking today mostly in the economy, but the principle is the same. Personal liberty and economic liberty are one and the same, and it shouldn't be divided into pieces. But I am an optimist on this and believe that working outside of Washington in the intellectual community, trying to change people's ideas is the way to go. Eventually, Washington will reflect those ideas. Right now, it is a swamp. And it's not, it's a swamp because most of the people in the administration and the courts and everybody still accept the old view of the progressive era that's been around for 100 years. And we truly haven't challenged the real problem in Washington because it's not in Washington. It's outside Washington. It's in the university. It's in the intellectual community. It's the issue of monetary policy. But that's where we're making headway. That's why I'm an optimist. Chris, I want to thank you for being with us today once again on our Mythbusters.
Thank you again, Dr. Paul.
Very good. And I want to thank the viewers today for tuning in. And please come back soon to the Ron Paul Liberty Report.